topical therapy. So what we have done is we have taken some patients who have not responded to topical therapy for a period of at least about 6 months, and we have excised their lesions, gotten a histopathological examination done, and seen whether the Ki67 values of these patients are high or not. Now, ours is a cross-sectional case series at the moment, but of course we are further investigating. 11 patients were taken and they underwent excision biopsy of their tumors after not responding to topical therapy, and 15 samples were sent for histopathological evaluation. Some patients had bilateral lesions. So we confirmed the diagnosis of OSSN, and then we just saw how much the level of Ki67 was. We divided them into presentation groups as and when they came. So the group 1 was older individuals with gelatinous diffuse type of presentations, which were much more difficult to treat because they were diffuse. And in this, there were 3 patients who had similar presentations, as we can see in these photographs, and they were not responding to therapy or either mitomycin C, 5-fluorouracil, or interferon alpha 2B. So again, their samples were excised and sent for histopathological examination. Next, we had some younger children with xeroderma pigmentosum who presented with bilateral pigmented OSSN. Again, interferon alpha 2B was used to treat them. They did not respond, and not only did they not respond, after excision there was a recurrence of the tumor in these patients. The third group was these leukomatous plaque type of presentations. They were again middle-aged to younger patients, and as this was actually quite confusing at first in presentation, after treatment the size did not reduce, and ASOCT showed that it was quite superficial, it was very easily removed. 2 more patients with a similar presentation were excised, and the same procedure carried out. Again, different presentations, a typical Mulberry type of tumor, anterior segment OCT did show a sort of further infiltration, which we were sort of worried about, and the Ki67 value of all of these patients came high. A young boy with presumed papilloma, again. This was a different case with Frank's squamous cell carcinoma presenting, and the same story, a histopathological examination showed that there was increased value of Ki67. The treatment was similar for all. We excised the tumors with a wide local excision, and cryo was done for the remaining conjunctiva. We tried to preserve as much conjunctiva as possible, and the defect was sutured with amniotic membrane graft. So we had a preponderance of females and 8 males, 3 females with bilateral presentation, and 5 patients were present. They were all confirmed to be OSSN. There were 6 different types of presentations which I have just described, and the Ki67 values on an average were 51.93%. Now, there's not a exact cutoff value of Ki67 done for these patients or in any previous study, but a value of above 20% is presumed to be high proliferative markers. So where exactly is the dilemma in this, and where does Ki67 even come as a whole? So Ki67 is a proliferative marker. We are giving anti-proliferative agents, yet there's no improvement in these patients. So we just thought, what exactly is this? Now, there might be a cutoff value of Ki67 in some patients, after which topical therapy does not respond. A further post-hoc analysis can be done on some patients, in which we will see if is Ki67 actually linked to recurrence of tumors, because in many of these patients the tumor has come back despite a wide local excision with free margins. So as we know, antigen Ki67 is a proliferative marker. Now there have been a number of studies on other types of cancers and even pterygium and other highly proliferative lesions, but there have been no studies on Ki67 values in OSSN per se. So with newer therapeutic agents coming targeting Ki67, this may be a thing that we should look upon in the future. Thank you so much.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
Which topical therapy did you prefer doing the
So we used, again, my study was case series. We used a number of topical presentations. So interferon alpha 2B was what we preferred in younger patients, as well as some older patients as well. In the gelatinous presentations, we used 3 topical agents: mitomycin C, 5-fluorouracil, and interferon alpha 2B.
all together or one?
No, sir. Everything was done separately.
So used all the three medication and then you have termed it as non-responsive to the topical therapy, right?
No, sir. We have used one particular medication for one patient and waited for a period of 6 months at least, or one complete cycle, like 6 cycles of the drug, and then we have excised the tumor because we could not, have a hit and trial run with all topical
Because at
therapy.
times when interferon is not able to resolve it, we shift to the 5-fluorouracil, which are more penetrative and to
Yes.
But if it is not responding, why would you still wait for 6 months? There's no point giving the treatment for 6 months if it's not responding. So the very first or second month will come to you.
Yes, so that is one thing that we had to think about, and again, the
That is
studies.
already a protocol.
In multiple studies, there have been no cutoff value that, okay, after 2 months we'll have to excise.
No, you have to accept that there is no benefit of the drug. In 2 months, you will not have it in the 4 months as well. Isn't it? That's simple common sense. So there's no point carrying it over. Rather, you will have an increase in size in case it is not responding. So you can rather have a switch of a second drug. In
Yes.
case that is also not responding, then you can plan to either size or something.
So we didn't have a fixed protocol for every patient. Like I said, as and when the patients started coming, we started collecting these patients together. So for some patients we did try 2 drugs, but for most patients we just ended up one.
and also do you have any data about the correct value in other patients who are responding to the
That
topical
was,
therapy?
sir, if the patient is responding to topical therapy, very few people have actually excised the tumors. So it's very difficult to
But
get
if you want to study like this, then
Yes,
you would
yes.
prefer to take a biopsy and send it
Yes.
for the guide.
So what I would prefer to do in these patients, that's why this is just a case series, observational case series. I would definitely like to excise even if the patient is responding and see what the Ki-67 value actually is. Because I have done a thorough research on whether any study has given a cutoff value of Ki-67 and it has not been done. So this is a
So we
sort
should
of
have a
highlight.
longitudinal data also.
Yes, yes.
So Nishi, as you understand, OSSN is an umbrella term. It includes everything from mild dysplasia, moderate severe carcinoma, and singular and squamous cell carcinoma. So where in the spectrum were these 11 cases? That never came up, and one case you even showed a squamous papilloma. Squamous papilloma doesn't come in the umbrella term of OSSN. So
No, we suspected a squamous papilloma, it came back as well.
yeah, so where were the 11 cases? Like what were the histopathologically, what were they?
They just came back as ocular surface squamous neoplasia confirmed. They were not in conjunctival intraepithelial neoplasia.
So
They
it
were
will be,
in
if you just go back to your pathologist, so SSM will be any of those. So what we usually, the non-responding cases are basically squamous cell carcinoma. They are not the dysplasia ones. The dysplasia ones respond very well to topical immunochemotherapy. So go back and look into it. Rather than Ki-67, the grade of the dysplasia is a much more important thing to consider when you are talking about recurrence or non-response to topical immunotherapy. So, thank you.
present here. I am Dr. Shreyati, Junior Resident, Osmania Medical College, Hyderabad. Today I am presenting a topic not every salmon keeps a doctor away, a case report of a conjunctival lymphoma. So what is a salmon patch? A salmon patch is a typical lymphoproliferative lesion which presents as a painless mass which progresses gradually and occurs either anteriorly in the orbit or beneath the conjunctiva. Coming to the introduction, ocular adnexal lymphoma is a rare type of lymphoma that affects the surrounding tissues of the eye. It has a very low incidence of about 0.2% of the population is affected and seen in 1 to 2% of all cases of NHL. Conjunctival lymphomas are considered the third most common type of conjunctival malignancy after squamous cell carcinoma and melanoma. So this case report presents a unique case of conjunctival lymphoma presenting as a pink salmon patch, and it emphasizes on the importance of multidisciplinary collaboration and advanced imaging techniques and treatment modalities. Coming to the patient history, patient is a 49-year-old male patient coming with complaints of painless fleshy growth which is pinkish in color on the white part of the left eye since 1 month, and it progressed gradually according to the patient's history. With patient is not having any history of systemic comorbidities or autoimmune disorders, and he is not giving any history of lymph node swellings or any history of weight loss. On general examination, everything seems to be normal. There are no signs of pallor, tears, cyanosis, clubbing or edema. On systemic examination also, there are no significant findings ruling out the systemic spread. On ocular examination, right eye anterior segment and the posterior segment is within the normal limits. Left eye lids were normal. There is a superotemporal 18 by 10 mm pinkish lesion touching the limbus with feeder vessel not involving the corneas. Cornea is clear, normal size, pupil is normal size and reacting to light, lens is clear, and fundus is within the normal limits. Extraocular movement are not affected and vision is 6 6. Further, we investigated and blood investigations and infectious disease screening, blood pressure, random blood sugar, everything came out to be normal. We further investigated patient for CT scan of orbit, axial and coronal section. There was no space occupying lesions in both the orbits. So provisional diagnosis is conjunctival lymphoma of the left eye. Differential diagnosis could be nodular scleritis, pterygium or chronic follicular conjunctivitis. The management strategy began with excisional biopsy of the conjunctival lesion under local anesthesia, and we sent it for HPE. HPE revealed chronic lymphoproliferative disorder. As lymphoma was confirmed, this is post-excisional biopsy picture of the patient. As lymphoma was confirmed on the HPE, we referred to cancer hospital. They further investigated for IHC and FDG PET. IHC is suggestive of CD20 positive cells consistent with a low-grade B-cell NHL, and FDG PET didn't show any metabolically active lesion either in the left eye conjunctiva or other segments of the body, suggesting a localized disease process. They further managed the patient with strontium 90 brachytherapy with the help of applicator. So the patient conjunctival lesion is resolved after brachytherapy, demonstrating its effectiveness and safety. This is the pre-intervention picture and post-intervention picture of the patient. Coming to the conclusion, on follow-up, resolution of Salmon patch noted. Localized conjunctival lymphoma has a good prognosis when treated with excision or EBRT or with both. Strontium 90 surface application brachytherapy has less side effects and can be used effectively and safely in conjunctival malignancies, both in primary and recurrent settings. Follow-up is advised for long-term for monitoring local and systemic recurrences. These are my references. Thank you. It first and completely, sir.
So what is the brachytherapy on?
Sir, to prevent the recurrences, we further referred the patient to cancer hospital, and they advised brachytherapy to prevent the recurrences, sir.
So what my understanding is if there is a residual tumor, then only we do the radiotherapy.
Sir, after excision, like the
Cases they do routinely also.
after 3 months of excision, we like the patient went for brachytherapy, sir. Not immediately.
So was there any sign of recurrence after 3 months?
No, sir, there were no signs of recurrence, but usually recurrence will happen at 5 years or 2 years like that, so not like monthly.
Dr. Shreya, why do you consider this case as a very unique?
Ma'am, this is the first time we are giving the strontium 90 brachytherapy for the patient. Previously, we have given, like in other cases, previously interferon alpha 2B has been given, then intravenous rituximab also has been given to the patient. But strontium 90 brachytherapy is the first time.
So Shreya, I will ask you a very basic question. How do you suspect orbital involvement in a conjunctival lymphoma? So clinically, what did you look for in this patient?
Ma'am, he presented his chief complaints only were like pinkish, fleshy, massy. Basically,
What is that examination that you did in the
slit lamp examination, ma'am.
orbital involvement? How will you rule out orbital involvement?
Extraocular movements we checked, ma'am. Those were full and free.
What
So,
else?
like checking for the extraocular movements ruled out the orbital involvement. Also, CTs can be advised.
No, I understand that. What else you will look for apart from extraocular movement?
In your clinical examination, she needs.
You won't check for proptosis.
Proptosis, ptosis, also the patient can present with.
So what imaging you did here?
CT scan or orbit scan.
So how do you do a systemic workup for this patient?
Ma'am, we advised complete blood picture and peripheral blood smear, and also this HIV and HbSAg.
Bone marrow.
Bone marrow biopsy can be done, sir, like once it's confirmed on CTC or anything.
So
So
we are
then
looking for systemic lymphoma. Will these suffice? Like what will you get? HIV, HbSAg, you talk about peripheral blood smear. What is the main thing you need to see for a
The
systemic
investigations
lymphoma?
which are telling are those for the pre-operative.
pre-operative.
Once you have diagnosed lymphoma, she is asking once you have diagnosed lymphoma. Now before you go in and decide whether you're going in for a localized radiotherapy, maybe brachy or otherwise, or you need to do a systemic chemotherapy. Before that, how would you assess that, what all investigation would you ask the patient to get to rule out systemic involvement of lymphoma?
So non-invasive techniques we could advise, like how we advised FDG PET scan for the patient, and invasive bone marrow biopsy and aspiration.
What else?
Anything else in serum you can look for?
LDH levels, ma'am.
Thank you, Chef.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, one and all. Myself, Dr. Kirulani Selvan, second year PG resident of Safdarjung Hospital, here to present many presentations of limbal networks. I have no financial disclosures or conflicts of interest. Limbal dermoids, as we all know, it's a benign congenital chorostomas which are histologically normal tissue at an abnormal location, the most common location being inferotemporal limbus. And they are found in 1 to 3 cases per 10,000 population, and they are found as round, domed, pinkish to white, yellowish lesion, which may have hair or even lipid as a content. So how do corneal dermoids occur? They occur due to sequestration of pluripotent cells during embryonic development or metaplastic transformation of mesoblast, or their inheritance can be due to familial or sporadic reasons. So clinical features, they will present in the childhood, they can present with redness, foreign body sensations, or they can even cause cosmetic disfigurement, and the child can even complain of blurring of vision due to astigmatism, and if the limbal dermoids are large enough, they can obstruct the visual axis and they can cause amblyopia. So, grading of the limbal dermoids is based on corneal involvement, surface in the shape, and the conjunctival involvements, and they are graded into grade 1, 2, and 3, and this is also essential for management of the limbal dermoids. Coming to the systemic associations, the first common systemic association being Goldenhar syndrome, and here the child will present with bilateral corneal dermoids, mandibular hypoplasia, ear tags and anosmia, and spina bifida and hemivertebrate. The second common systemic association being Treacher-Collins syndrome. Here the child will present with lip coloboma, mandibular hypoplasia, abnormal dentition, and antimongoloid slant. Other driver systemic associations include Solomon syndrome, linear sebaceous nevus of Jarazuhan, and Torgello-Lacassi-Grosty syndrome. So the main purpose of our study is to describe the various ocular and the systemic associations of limbal dermoid. We did an observational case series on 10 patients over a period of 2 months, and all of them presented with fleshy mass in the inferotemporal limbal region. All of them were examined thoroughly and multidisciplinary approach was conferred with them. Presentation 1, it's a 2 patients with Treacher-Collins syndromes are followed up in this, and this is a case which was genetically confirmed. Here we can see downward slant of the eyes with lower lid notching, corneal dermoids, microtia, preauricular tags, and mandibular hypoplasia. So we referred the child to ENT specialist as the child had multiple abnormalities in the ear ranging from outcomes of our study include, it was a smaller duration of follow-up, only 2 months was we followed up, and very few number of cases were there, and this highlights the importance of a large number of cases to form a large multi-centric study for better epidemiology. So, we would like to conclude by saying that we as ophthalmologists need to collaborate with pediatricians, ENT specialists, orthopedics, neurosurgeons, and maxillofacial surgeons to determine the best treatment approach, which differs depending on the age and the systemic conditions of the child. Thank you.
How many of these patients did you manage in your hospital?
So 10 patients we just followed up, sir. And
Did
all
you
of
any
them,
perform any surgeries on them?
so no, sir. None of the limbal levels were large enough to perform surgery.
What is the criteria of them? Is there, they have to be a large enough?
So if at all they are obstructing the visual axis, then they will be needing surgery. Or if they are causing cosmetic deformities, or if there is any exposure large enough, if the child is not able to close the eyelids, then we can go for surgery.
Most of them were having cosmetic deformity. Cosmetic was anyway a concern. It's in the limbus, it's quite visible. What was the age group of your patient?
So all of them ranged between 5 to 12 years.
So 12-year patient would not have a cosmetic exam.
Yes, sir, but it was a little bit lesser. The diameter was less than 5 mm, sir. So 3 to 5 mm. All of them were between 3 to 5 mm, sir.
What about the astigmatism?
Ma'am, yes, we gave spectacle correction for the same, and the child was accepting.
After surgery?
After surgery, yes, ma'am, residual astigmatism was persistent, but we gave
Yes, perform
spectacle
surgery.
correction.
Yeah.
If you have given it, she's still a patient for astigmatism. What do you think?
No, like, we just gave spectacle correction.
It is good that you looked into the systemic associations, but suppose you will have to treat this patient, so how will you approach? How do you plan your management in the case of embryo?
Now, we can go by 2 ways. There is medical management as well as surgical management. Medical management is required for those children who have smaller diameters of limbal dermoids. Like if it's less than 3 mm, and if they're having mild astigmatism less than 1 diopters, they'll be going for medical management. And if they're having any amblyopia or anything like that, we can go for occlusion therapy. Amblyopia treatment we can give them. And if they are large enough, then we can go for surgical management like excision, shaping and excision can be done. Or lamellar keratoplasty can also be done.
So how do you plan for a surgical? So medical management, you're basically talking about occlusion therapy.
No,
For amblyopia, in case of amblyopia,
So surgical management, how do you plan? Any investigation you would like to do? Any imaging modality you know?
we can do MRI to rule out UVM can be done, and MRI can be done to rule out extraocular muscle involvement, and UVM can be done to see the depth of the limbal dermoids. Like if the descendant membranes or anything is involved or not, we can look for it, and how much of the contact depth is involved. We can see.
Thank you.
In case of angiomatomas, hematoma over the eyebrow, which was mimicking as a dermoid. So, 31-year-old female presented to us with painless swelling over the inner aspect of the right eyebrow since 2 years. It was gradually increasing in size and approximately measured 3 to 2 centimeters. There was no history of any trauma or discharge from the swelling, and she was more worried about it cosmetically. So we thought that we will excise, and I was thinking it might be a dermoid, but someone warned me that it is not the common location of dermoid. Usually it is seen laterally. So visual acuity was 6 by 6 and 6, and on local examination there was a non-tender 3 into 2 centimeter mobile lump with well-defined inferior border, which was reaching up to the upper eyelid, but superiorly it was not well defined. So there were no signs of inflammation or discoloration. Any signs of superficial or deep fixity was there. So we went ahead and did a CT scan also. So in the CT diagnosis they are given as dermoid, but there was no intracranial extension or such. So it showed a 1.6 into 0.6 mm preorbital lesion. So underlying bone was normal. So excision biopsy was performed, and I tried to reach the plane, there was no plane, so we called the surgeons, and then eventually the tissue was excised. When the biopsy results came, it revealed a haphazard arrangement of varying type of blood vessels with adipose tissue intermixed. So the biopsy result came as angiolipomatous. So because of that, I presented this, because it's a hematoma is basically a disorganized arrangement of tissues, and it is normally occurring in an abnormal location. So cutaneous angiolipomatous hematomas are very rare, and vascular neoplasms with adipose tissue and muscular components. So we did not I did not suspect, I found it so. So this case was what I felt it was unique appropriately because it posed a diagnostic dilemma. Histopathology aided the diagnosis. These are rare lesions, and to the best of my knowledge, over the medial side of eyebrow, it has not been described. Common lesions in these are Kelesian inclusion cyst, pyelometrosoma, dermoid sebaceous. Thank you. That's it.
Your clinical diagnosis was
Dermoid, sir.
lipoma.
No, sir. For lipoma, it should be soft. It was more firm.
You said it was soft and freely mobile.
It was freely mobile, but it was not lipoma, because slip sign will be positive in lipoma. And we had shown to surgery people, they also said, it's not there. Thank you.
Very good evening to everyone, and thank you for having us here to present this work of ours. It's titled What's in a Name? A Fleshy Tale of Diverse Pathologies, replied the calendar. Callus we know is a Latin word which translates to flesh, and hence the title. And we should soon discover as to why it is a seed for diverse or a method of pathologies. Sunday evenings can be spent in cozy environments at home, where we are all comfortable, look at the sparkle in the eye, be happy about it. Only to be very realistic of a Sunday night, that Monday morning is Monday blue. And what if in the OPD, when we are the patient and the pink becomes the new blue? And then we see something like this, where a pathologist has arisen from the inner canthus or the medial angle of the eye and has been rendered a stepmotherly treatment to the eye, while you can see a very well centered IOL through a round pupil and failure to notice and recognize as to how a pathology can arise from the canal. So we decided to introspect and then retrospect our own case records over the last 2 decades at Center Site, and we found 36 eyes of 34 patients, and we included all those patients who underwent a biopsy and histologically removed any arising from the canalicular mass. What it involved was a comprehensive clinical evaluation with both attention to detail, one slit lamp to the eye, and also systemic evaluation, surgical excision of all those masses which are well circumscribed and minimally surgery, followed by histopathological analysis. Surgical excision, we kept in mind the oncological principles that 4 mm flare margin was taken from the given lesion associated with or without cryotherapy, the pyogenic conjunctiva, and surface reconstruction either with glue or amniotic membrane graft as indicated. So this is a representative diagram of how a 4 mm margin from the lesion would look like. And our results showed that there was a high preponderance among the males, with unilaterality being in about 95% of our patients, and majority of them presented with a mass. Also, we realized, we inspected, examined the punctum and the lateral nerve flow pathway to rule out any association with the lateral outflow system. And Epiphyra was a presenting symptom in about 30% of our cases, with majority of them on definitive histopathological diagnosis with proven to be benign, while a few of them were malignant. This is the range of lesions our record showed to us, ranging from congenital abnormalities like a complex glioblastoma inflammation, cystic lesion, benign lesions like papilloma, and we shall come back to this case, which I shall show later, a combination of OSS and amyloid, which is absolutely rare, and also those leaning towards the side of malignancy involving a sebaceous adenoma and sebaceous gland carcinoma and lymphoma. This on histopathological diagnosis were proven to be arising from chronicle, and each of these pathologies are listed as seen. This is the corresponding histopathological image to each of those class which is seen. On tabulating all our results and subsequently comparing this with other present large series, where it was shown that papilloma and nevus were the most common in the other series, to our surprise in our oncological setup, we found that sebaceous gland hyperplasia was on a higher level. This is a few comparative images of pre and post-operative cases at 6 weeks and 3 months. What is interesting to note about these cases was this case, a combination of both an OSS and amyloid, and systemically we evaluated this patient for amyloidosis, which is negative. This is a histopathological confirmation with the apple green birefringence on bipolar lens microscopy. This was a particular case where we started off with a cancer, where there was a fleshy mass at the middle angle of the eye, or lymphoma, on histopathological diagnosis. And systemically, the patient had evidence of lymphoma on PET CT examination. Thus, in conclusion, slit lamp evaluation is the key. Not every mass at the inner angle is lacrimal. 80% of the radicular masses are benign, and it is a roadway for system report.
In those suspicious lesions, did you include to the excision?
No, sir. These studies were well circumscribed and unable to complete excision biopsy. So we did a excision biopsy in this case.
If you say 4 millimeter of circumference, so it would be disrupting the lacrimal drainage system. Anyways, you have to do it.
Yes, since most of these only in cases of malignancy there is suspect that it can be a malignancy when there with a clear margin. However, for the benign lesions, that is not followed.
That's what I'm saying. So that means where you suspected, you first did incisional biopsy.
The suspect is we went ahead with clinical radiological work on more than an incision biopsy. Like, for example, if I'm doing a separation carcinoma, and I'm also looking at the examination of a nodularity, which is extending beyond the tarsus, any other focus. Or if I'm looking at the neck margin, and I'm looking at the right over the margin, loss of lashes, or injected cells, other samples to see.
Lots of flashes are not going to be there because
In
the
the
patient is,
Yes, apart from being an isolated lesion of the canopy, where it is necessary and this very rare. In our case, we had that one case where we might have also done margin and then subsequent reconstruction of surface.
in that particular case, did you then excise the canalicular system as well?
One, yes, sir.
Are you sure?
Yes, sir.
Because I would probably not excise the canalicular system in the first go. I would keep the patient from a regular follow-up and would size, definitely size as much as possible clear margin excision, but sparing the canaliculus because the canaliculus is not overtly involved and it's a conductible thing and canaliculus are inhibited. If you draw a circle 4 millimeter, with a sort of a radius of 4 millimeter all around, definitely you will have it.
Yes. Yes.
What is the
I would rather
So
size.
for a sebaceous adenoma, like what he's trying to say, sebaceous adenoma versus a sebaceous gland carcinoma, many a times clinically we can't differentiate. So in such a case, you can't just go ahead and go wide excision biopsy. Yes, you can do an excision, in toto excision rather than doing a incision biopsy because the mass itself is so small. But following that, based on the histopathology, you need to take a call whether you need to go in a second time and do the wide excision biopsy.
Yes.
But if you directly go ahead, maybe this is sebaceous adenoma and you have done everything like the rational system is affected. That is not a scenario with
Yes.
Lysogram. So
Yes.
that's what is it.
Yes. Yes.
I think they probably do a frozen section
Control.
control.
Yes.
I don't think for these
The image suspected.
I would doubt any of these lesions have gone for
Not for
frozen.
these the NIT involving cases, yes.
How long was the study?
20 years.
Which center?
Center student and both institute with lot of
And
well-being.
because the center of that is not only actually
Yes, sir. Pretty good. 10 years back, yes. Since all these cases are part of the Thank you so much.
Can you just say to the other people who were there?
And histopathological and clinical risk factors and role of adjuvant therapy in secondary enucleation for retinoblastoma. So, what do you mean by high risk factors? How to look for high risk factors? What is the significance of high risk factors and how do we treat with cases with high risk factors in a case of retinoblastoma? To find answers to all these questions, this study was designed. So, purpose of this study was to correlate histopathological risk factors with clinical risk factors and role of adjuvant chemotherapy in retinoblastoma undergoing secondary enucleation. It was a retrospective, interventional, consecutive case series including 406 patients undergoing secondary enucleation. Evaluation of clinical risk factors included proptosis, pre-thysical changes, sterile orbital inflammation, orbital cellulitis, ophthalmos, corneal edema, raised IOP, ECCs, pseudohypopion, hyphema, NBI, ectropion uvea, secondary glaucoma, and cataract. On HPE, infiltration of lamina cribrosa, retrolaminar optic nerve, transected end of optic nerve, more than 3 mm of choroid, sclera, extrascleral tissue, iris, ciliary body, anterior chamber, vortex wing infiltration was considered as histopathological risk factor. In our study, all the cases of retinoblastoma were clinically evaluated for the presence of these clinical high risk factors, and based on this, all CRF positive cases after baseline bone marrow and cerebrospinal fluid examination and MRI were treated with 6 cycles of neoadjuvant chemotherapy and focal therapy. After completion of 6 cycles, again MRI was repeated, and on the other hand, all the CRF negative cases were treated with chemo reduction and focal treatment. Presence of HRF was evaluated in all the cases after secondary enucleation. All the HRF positive cases after bone marrow CSF examination again received 6 cycles of adjuvant chemotherapy plus minus EBRT, and all the cases HRF negative were given customized ocular prosthesis and were kept up follow-up. Out of all these 406 patients that underwent secondary enucleation, CRF was present in 243 cases, that is 60%, in which ACCs were seen in 22, sterile orbital inflammation in 32, secondary glaucoma in 39, and NBI was present in 40 cases. Out of 243 CRF positive cases, HRF was present in 91 cases, and in 163 cases without any CRF, HRF was found in 31 cases. Overall, HRF was present in 122 cases, that is 30%. Out of this 122 cases, massive choroidal invasion was seen in 56 cases, followed by ciliary body involvement, which was seen in 26 cases. 37% of CRF positive cases eventually had HRF positive, but amongst all HRF positive cases, baseline CRF was found in 76% of cases. Total 91 cases had both CRF and HRF positivity. 31 cases had HRF positivity without any baseline CRF. All 122 patients with HRF positivity were given 6 cycles of adjuvant chemotherapy, where only 10 cases required EBRT, and with this we could achieve life salvage in 117 cases. Life salvage in HRF positive cases was found to be 96%, 100% in HRF negative cases, 98% in CRF positive cases. Overall life salvage rate was 99%. Yes, you heard that right, 99% overall life salvage rate, and as clinician, what else we crave for? So earlier published literature also emphasized on importance of adjuvant chemotherapy in reducing the risk of metastasis in HRF positive cases. These are the few studies which were done previously. This is the AJCC classification for HRF, risk of metastasis related to death
was highest in CT4B stage with orbital retinoblastoma. On reviewing previously published similar studies, we found that our study had the largest sample size, choroidal invasion being the most common HRF seen in almost all series, and neoadjuvant adjuvant chemotherapy can significantly improve the life salvage rates. So, to conclude, clinical high-risk factors and histopathological high-risk factors are strongly related like a yin-yang, and presence of CRF predicts possible HRF. Despite neoadjuvant chemotherapy, a significant number of patients may have HRF on secondary enucleation, but appropriate adjuvant chemotherapy can significantly improve life salvage rate. Thank you.
Slides were beautifully. So, the 99% life cycle that you were talking about, that's at how many years?
That is from 20 years later. Last 20 years.